You don't belong here. The words hit Ava Carter like a slap, echoing through the high-end luxury mall as she stood at the entrance, the cool marble floors reflecting her calm, composed demeanor. She wasn't the flashy type. No diamonds, no designer bags, just a simple black t-shirt and jeans. She had walked in with quiet confidence, expecting a routine shopping trip. But now, standing in front of the security guard who had just made that statement, something inside her shifted. Ava didn't flinch. She'd heard that before, felt it before, and it had never been a surprise. But today this moment would be different. She was done letting people define her. Done letting them decide who belonged and who didn't. Ava Carter was not just another shopper in this mall. She wasn't just a customer. She was the CEO of this entire shopping center, the one who owned it, the one who had poured years of work into building the business to where it was today. But to these people, she was invisible. To them, she wasn't rich enough, not important enough, not the right type of person to belong in their world. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the guard continued, his voice a mix of superiority and suspicion. "But this area is reserved for elite clients only. You don't have access." Ava didn't let the insult sting. She had faced much worse in her life, both personally and professionally. She had built her empire from the ground up, dealt with rejection, racism, and bias time and time again. But this was something new. This was the kind of blatant disrespect that she no longer had the patience for. As the guard's eyes scanned her, a flicker of doubt crossed his face, as if he was unsure whether to continue. Ava took a slow, deliberate step forward, locking eyes with him. "I don't need to prove anything to you," she said calmly, her voice steady, unwavering. "You'll find my name in the system. I own this place." His expression faltered for a moment, then quickly recovered. He clearly wasn't buying it. "I'm afraid I'll have to call security," he said, his tone now shifting to a rehearsed, robotic professionalism. Ava stood her ground. "Go ahead. Call them. I'll be here when they arrive." She wasn't going anywhere. This was her moment. She had worked too hard for this. Too many nights spent sacrificing, pushing herself to the limit. Ava was used to being underestimated, to being looked down upon because of her race, her appearance, her calm demeanor. But she had learned long ago that silence wasn't weakness. It was power. Ava's phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out slowly, without looking away from the guard. A simple tap on the screen and her assistant Nia was on the other end of the line. "It's happening," Ava said, her voice still calm, controlled. "Activate Protocol 6. Nia's response was immediate, professional. "Understood. It's live." Ava slipped the phone back into her pocket, but as she did, she felt the weight of the moment. The tension in the air was palpable. She knew exactly what would happen next. The guard hesitated. A second later, his radio crackled to life. Ava could hear the words clearly, even at a distance. "Security to the entrance. We have a situation with a suspected trespasser." Ava didn't move. She wasn't a trespasser. She owned this space. And in just a few minutes the world would see that power. Ava wasn't going to argue, wasn't going to shout. She was going to let the truth do the talking. The guard's posture stiffened as he looked back at her, his face reddening in embarrassment. "Please, ma'am," he started again, but his words trailed off when he saw the calm certainty in her eyes. He was caught. The others around them, shoppers, staff, security guards, began to notice. A few whispers spread through the crowd as people started to realize that something was off. The guard's disbelief was written all over his face. You own this place?" Ava nodded slowly. "Yes, I own it." She gave him one last, steady look before turning her gaze to the mall manager, who had just appeared from behind the scenes. The manager's eyes widened when he saw Ava standing there. "I'll take it from here," Ava said simply. "Thank you." The manager hesitated, looking from the guard to Ava, his expression shifting from confusion to realization. He was starting to understand. Ava wasn't the one who didn't belong here. It was the people who thought they could decide her worth. And in this moment Ava was about to prove them wrong. Ava stood still, her eyes locked on the manager, the weight of the moment pressing in on her as the murmurs grew louder around them. She could hear the whispers of the shoppers, the uncertainty in their voices, the confusion as they realized who she was. They had no idea that the woman they had just tried to humiliate was the very person who owned this entire space. Ava didn't care about their confusion. It wasn't her job to explain herself to people who didn't deserve her time. The moment she had walked in, they had already judged her. But now the tables were turning. The manager stepped forward, hesitating, his eyes darting from Ava to the guard and back again. He was clearly trying to process what was happening. "You own this place?" he asked, the disbelief in his voice unmistakable. Ava didn't respond right away. Instead, she stepped closer to him, her movements calm and deliberate. "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "I own this place. I'm Ava Carter." For a moment there was silence. The manager didn't know how to react. He had clearly never expected this. Ava wasn't the flashy CEO you read about in tabloids or see in interviews. She wasn't the type to flaunt her wealth. She preferred to let her work speak for itself. But now, here she was, face to face with the people who had made the mistake of assuming she didn't belong. "You didn't think I belonged here," Ava continued, her tone firm but calm. "You thought I was just another person who didn't fit your image. But you were wrong." The manager opened his mouth, but no words came out. He could see it now, the calmness in her eyes, the way she carried herself. This wasn't a woman to be underestimated. She was a force, one that had built this empire, and now she was standing in front of him, showing him what true power looked like. The security guard, still unsure of what to do, stepped back, glancing at the other staff members for support. But none of them spoke. Ava's gaze never wavered. She wasn't going to let them control the narrative anymore. "I'm not here to make a scene," Ava said, her voice rising. "Just enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. But you have just made the biggest mistake of your life." The manager's face flushed with embarrassment, and Ava could see the recognition starting to dawn on him. He realized that this wasn't a random person. This was the CEO, the owner, the very person who held the power to make or break this mall. He had underestimated her, and now he would pay the price. Ava turned her attention back to the guard, who was still standing there, frozen. "You should be thanking me," she said, her voice soft yet cutting. "You've just been exposed. And now your actions will have consequences." The crowd had grown bigger, and Ava could see the smartphones pointed at her, capturing every moment. This was it. The truth was coming out. Ava had been in this situation before, had been judged and dismissed because of her appearance, because of her race. But today she wasn't going to let it slide. Today she was going to take control. She was going to show them what happens when you mess with the wrong person. She took a deep breath, then pulled out her phone. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to make a scene. All she needed was a few taps and everything would change. "Nia," Ava said, her voice steady as she spoke into the phone. "Activate Protocol 6. It's time." The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Understood, Ava. It's live." As Ava hung up, the energy in the room shifted. The manager, still trying to maintain some semblance of control, took a step back, but Ava's eyes remained locked on him. The power had shifted. Ava wasn't just some woman in the mall. She was the force behind it. And now the world was going to see just how far her influence reached. Ava's phone buzzed again, and she glanced down at the screen. A brief message from Nia flashed before her eyes. "Protocol 6 active. Preparing the documents now." Ava's lips curled into a small smile. She didn't need to check the details. She knew what was coming. The manager, still visibly shaken, shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I don't know what kind of joke this is," he muttered, trying to regain some semblance of authority. But his words had no weight. The crowd had grown even larger now, many of them stopping in their tracks to watch, some with their phones raised, capturing the unfolding drama. Ava didn't care about the cameras. They were just witnesses. "It's not a joke," Ava replied, her voice calm and firm. "And you're about to find out just how serious it is." The tension in the air was thick now, almost suffocating. Ava stood with a poise that commanded respect. She wasn't just any CEO. She was someone who had fought for every inch of success she had earned. And now, she was making sure that the people who had underestimated her would regret it. "I don't think you understand the position you've put yourself in," Ava continued, her eyes never leaving the manager's face. "You've just tried to humiliate the wrong person." The manager opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Ava could see the gears turning in his mind. He was finally starting to realize the weight of his mistake. The guard, still standing awkwardly to the side, seemed to shrink under the growing pressure of the moment. His earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by a look of confusion and uncertainty. Ava wasn't done yet. "You can call security all you want," she said, her tone measured. "But they won't be able to do anything. Not when they realize who I am. And they will." The manager glanced nervously toward the security office in the distance. Ava didn't need to say another word. She knew the message had hit its mark. The tide had turned. She wasn't the one on trial here. She was the one holding all the cards. "You're right about one thing," Ava added, her voice almost too quiet for anyone but the manager to hear. "This is a mistake. But it's yours, not mine." The manager blinked rapidly, his face flushing red as his mistake became more apparent by the second. Ava could see the shift in his expression. The arrogance was gone now, replaced by a growing panic. The crowd around them was no longer whispering. They were watching closely, waiting for the next move. Ava turned to look around the mall, taking in the scene before her. The marble floors gleamed under the bright lights, the expensive boutiques lined with luxury goods. And yet, despite all the wealth surrounding her, it was this moment, this confrontation, that was now in the spotlight. Ava had never felt more in control. The shift had happened almost imperceptibly, but now there was no denying it. She had gone from being the one who was looked down upon to the one who held the power. And with that power came the responsibility to act. "I want the board here in 5 minutes, Ava said, her voice firm. "And I want every action you've taken documented and logged. Every word you've spoken." Nia's voice came through on the other end of the line, cool and professional. "I've already got it all. Documents are ready. We're moving forward." Ava nodded slightly. She didn't need to do anything else. The pieces were falling into place. The manager's face had gone pale. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but stopped when he saw Ava's unwavering gaze. "You can't do this," he stammered. Ava didn't respond. There was no need to. The truth was undeniable now. The people around her were watching, and they were about to see something they would never forget. Ava wasn't some imposter. She wasn't some powerless victim. She was the owner of this place, the one who had worked tirelessly to build it from the ground up. And now she was going to show them exactly what happens when you underestimate her. Ava's eyes never wavered as the manager stood frozen, the weight of the situation slowly crushing him. The crowd, once murmuring with confusion and uncertainty, now waited in silent anticipation. Ava had said it. She had called for the board, and now there was no turning back. The air in the mall had shifted from one of exclusivity and elitism to something else, something that felt like reckoning. Ava didn't care about the luxury boutiques or the designer bags on display. She didn't care about the money that flowed through this place. She cared about one thing: justice. The manager, still stumbling over his words, tried once more to regain control of the situation. "You can't just do this," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence it had earlier. "This is a private mall. We have rules." Ava tilted her head slightly, considering him. "And your rules are to judge people by how they look, by what they wear, by who they think they are." The manager opened his mouth, but no words came out. Ava knew he was trying to find a way to salvage the situation, to get back on top. But it was too late. The moment had passed. The power had shifted. "You don't get to make the rules here," Ava continued. "Not anymore. Not when you've crossed the line." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm, controlled demeanor was enough. The truth was on her side, and it was about to unfold in front of everyone. She looked around at the people who had gathered to witness the scene. Some of them had been filming, but Ava didn't care about that either. What mattered now was what was happening in this moment. This was the turning point. This was the moment when things changed. She didn't need to scream, didn't need to fight. She needed to act. Ava pulled out her phone again, her fingers tapping quickly on the screen. "Nia," she said, her voice steady, "send the documents. Make sure they're ready for the meeting." Nia's response was quick and clear. "Already done. Everything is in place." Ava nodded slightly. The pieces were in motion and she could feel the shift. The crowd, still captivated by what was happening, began to murmur again. But this time it was different. The whispers were no longer of doubt or judgment. They were of realization. They were seeing what real power looked like. "I'll be meeting with the board soon," Ava said, her tone now cutting through the tension in the room. "And when I do, we'll be discussing this incident. We'll be discussing what happens when you let your prejudices dictate how you treat others." The manager's face went pale as the reality of his situation hit him. The other employees, who had been silent up until this point, looked uncomfortable. Ava knew they were wondering if they would be next, if they would be held accountable for their actions. "You have a choice," Ava said, her voice calm. "You can either make this right, or you can keep playing the game, and we'll see how far that gets you." No one spoke. Ava let the silence hang in the air, letting the weight of her words sink in. She didn't need to explain herself further. She didn't need to make anyone understand. The truth was there for all to see. And in that moment, Ava felt a quiet satisfaction. She had built this empire with nothing but hard work and determination, and now she was going to protect it. She was going to ensure that no one, no matter their position or their race, could ever treat her like she was invisible again. The manager didn't respond. His gaze dropped to the floor, and for the first time he seemed to understand that the power in the room wasn't his. Ava was in control now. As the mall staff and shoppers began to quietly disperse, Ava stood tall, the weight of her decisions and her actions settling around her. This was her moment. This was her victory. And it had only just begun. Ava watched as the manager turned, his shoulders slumping in defeat, as if the weight of his actions had finally caught up with him. The security guard, still standing at a distance, avoided her gaze. The crowd had quieted down, but Ava could feel their eyes on her, the curiosity, the disbelief. She had done it. She had taken control of the situation, and it felt like the first time in a long while that she had been able to stand in her own power. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was deciding. "I need to make a call," Ava said to Nia, her voice clear and direct, and as she dialed the number she could feel her resolve hardening. The seconds ticked by, the sound of the phone ringing sharp in the stillness of the mall. When Nia answered, Ava wasted no time. "Get me a full report on the mall's management practices, especially the security team. I want everything logged. Every incident, every comment, every action. I'll need it for the meeting," she instructed. Nia's response was immediate, without hesitation. "It's already on its way. I'll have it to you in under 10 minutes. Ava nodded, though Nia couldn't see it. She didn't need to say more. The paperwork, the documentation, it was all being handled. All she had to do was wait for the moment when everything would be revealed. When the board met, they would see the truth. They would see how a powerful CEO, one who had built this empire from the ground up, had been humiliated and dismissed in the very place she owned. Ava looked around the mall again, taking in the sleek glass storefronts and polished floors. It all felt so far removed from the struggle she had gone through to get here. But today it wasn't the wealth or the luxury that mattered. It was about respect. It was about making sure that no one would ever treat her, or anyone else like her, like they didn't belong. She could feel her phone buzzing again. Another message from Nia. "Board members are being notified. Meeting in 30 minutes. They're on their way." Ava allowed herself a moment to breathe. 30 minutes. That was all she needed. She glanced at the manager one last time. He was still standing there, his hands fidgeting, unable to meet her eyes. He was realizing at last that he had made a grave error. Ava didn't feel anger. She didn't feel the need to shout or lash out. What she felt was something far more powerful, control. "Tell them to be prepared," Ava said softly to Nia, her tone even. "We're not just going to discuss this. We're going to change how things are done here." She ended the call and turned to face the manager, who was now looking at the floor. The silence between them was heavy, but Ava knew she didn't need to speak further. Her actions had already said everything that needed to be said. She was the one in charge now. She had the power to make changes, to force them to confront their biases, and to ensure that no one, not even the smallest hint of discrimination, would go unchallenged. Ava didn't need to explain herself any longer. She had made her point. The crowd, now beginning to disperse, still whispered, but their voices held a different tone. Some looked at Ava with admiration, while others seemed almost uncomfortable. For some, it was a reminder that power didn't always look like what they expected. It didn't always wear a suit or a designer watch. Sometimes it wore the face of someone who had worked harder than anyone realized, who had fought for every step forward. Ava straightened her back and looked around once more. Her mall was her kingdom, and she was going to make sure it was run on her terms. Ava stood in the center of the mall, the weight of what she had just set in motion settling around her like a silent storm. The hustle of the luxury shops around her seemed distant now, the bustle of high-end customers and staff fading into the background. She didn't need to look at her watch to know the board meeting was about to begin. She could feel it. Everything was moving faster now. The way people were looking at her had shifted. Whispers that had once been of disbelief were now full of curiosity, maybe even fear. Ava was the kind of person they had underestimated, but not anymore. Not today. The sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, and Ava turned to see the first board member arrive. He was a tall man, sharply dressed in a tailored suit, his face a mask of professionalism. But Ava noticed the slight hesitation in his step as he saw her standing there, poised and waiting. "Miss Carter," he greeted her, his voice low but respectful. "We're ready to begin." Ava didn't respond with a smile or a greeting. Instead, she nodded and gestured for him to follow her. The board members were going to hear everything today. No more games. No more pretending. They were going to hear about the incident that had just transpired and the changes she planned to make. Ava led him to the private meeting room, where the rest of the board members were already gathered. As they sat down, Ava could feel the weight of their stares on her. The usual power dynamics had shifted. She wasn't the one being judged anymore. "I'm sure you're all aware of the situation that occurred today," Ava began, her voice clear and authoritative. "The treatment I received from your security team, from the management at this mall, was unacceptable. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a reflection of the systemic issues that still exist here." There was a murmur around the table, but Ava didn't wait for anyone to speak. "You all know what this place stands for, or at least you claim to. You know the image we try to project. But today the reality was laid bare for all to see. It wasn't about who I am. It was about what I look like. It was about the assumptions you made based on my appearance, and it was about the way you treated me as if I didn't belong." The room was silent now. No one spoke. No one moved. Ava could see the discomfort in their eyes. She knew they hadn't expected this. They hadn't expected her to confront them so directly, to take control of the narrative. "I've spent years building this company, this brand," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I've fought for every step forward, every victory, and I won't stand by and let people like you, people in positions of power, treat others like they don't matter. That stops today." The tension in the room was palpable. It was no longer about corporate strategy or market share. It was about something deeper, something more fundamental. Respect. Equality. The very things Ava had fought for her whole life. "The changes I'm implementing here will be swift and undeniable," Ava stated firmly. "First, I'm instituting mandatory bias training for all management and security personnel. Second, I will be restructuring the way we hire, making sure that no one is ever judged for how they look, how they dress, or where they come from. And third, I am personally overseeing the internal audits to ensure that incidents like today's never happen again." Ava paused, letting her words sink in. "This mall, my mall, will stand as a place where people are treated with dignity, no matter who they are. If you can't accept that, then I suggest you start looking for a new job." The room remained still. Ava's eyes scanned the faces around the table, watching for any sign of resistance. But all she saw was acknowledgement. They knew she meant it. They knew this wasn't just a fleeting decision. This was her commitment to change. And Ava Carter always followed through. As the board members began to nod in agreement, Ava's gaze softened just slightly. This was only the beginning. But she had already taken the first step in a journey that would reshape everything. The mall. The management. The people who worked here. And most importantly, the way people saw her. Ava had always known the power was hers. Now she was showing the world just how far that power reached. Ava sat back in her chair, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made settle into place. The board members around her were still processing the changes she had outlined, their faces a mixture of surprise, respect, and something else, perhaps fear. She had not expected to walk into this meeting with such an overwhelming sense of control, but here she was commanding their attention, not just with her words, but with the unshakable authority of someone who had earned her place. As the room fell into silence, Ava could see that they were finally coming to terms with the reality she had presented. The discomfort that had once been palpable in the air now felt like a shift towards reluctant acceptance. Ava was right. No one had anticipated her to take charge in this way. No one had expected her to demand not just changes in policy, but a transformation in the very culture of the organization. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke the silence. It was Paul, one of the senior members of the board, who had been sitting in the back, his arms crossed over his chest. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice low but steady. "Ava, I think we can all agree that this situation wasn't handled as it should have been," he began, his words carrying an air of caution but also something else, a hint of acknowledgement. "We all know you've worked hard to build this company into what it is, and you've earned respect. What happened today was unacceptable." Ava looked at him, waiting for him to continue, knowing that this was the moment where they would either fall in line or challenge her. The room was holding its breath. Paul shifted in his seat, then added, "But change, real change, will take time. Implementing new policies and procedures isn't something that happens overnight." Ava didn't let his words linger for too long. She had heard them before. She had been told time and time again that change would take time. But the time for waiting had passed. "You're right," Ava said calmly, locking eyes with him. "Change will take time. But it starts now. It starts with us acknowledging the mistakes, and more importantly, taking responsibility. I'm not asking for a quick fix. I'm asking for a commitment to making this place a better environment for everyone, regardless of their race, their background, or their appearance." There was a pause in the room as the weight of her words settled over the board members. Ava's tone was unwavering. She wasn't asking for their approval. She was demanding their action. "If we're serious about being a company that stands for something greater than just profit, we need to start living those values," she continued, her voice strong. "I'm not going to sit by and let this kind of behavior go unchecked. This is my responsibility, and it's yours too." Paul nodded slowly, his face softening as he seemed to understand the gravity of what she was saying. "We're with you, Ava," he said quietly, and as he looked around the room, the other board members seemed to follow suit, nodding in agreement. "We'll do what needs to be done. It'll be a long road, but we'll walk it with you." Ava took a deep breath, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. She had fought for this moment, fought for the ability to lead with the kind of power that came from her authenticity and her relentless drive. The change was already beginning, and it felt like a new chapter was unfolding in front of her. "Good," she said simply, her gaze sweeping across the table. "Then let's get to work." The room seemed to exhale collectively, the atmosphere shifting from one of resistance to one of collective purpose. Ava knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and challenges she hadn't yet anticipated. But she was ready for it. She had always been ready. As the meeting continued, Ava felt a sense of pride swell within her. This was her moment, not just because she had taken control of a situation, but because she was setting the tone for the future. This was only the beginning. The world was going to see a new side of Ava Carter, and it was going to be one that would demand respect, one that would never be overlooked again. Ava stepped out of the boardroom with a newfound sense of clarity. The meeting had been long, but it had been exactly what she needed. The board members had agreed to her vision, to the changes that were necessary, and to the hard work that lay ahead. As she walked through the halls of the mall, her steps were purposeful, the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders in a way that felt both heavy and empowering. She knew that the work wasn't done yet. In fact, it had only just begun. The changes she had outlined would take time, but they would be implemented. No more hollow promises, no more empty words. It was time for action. As Ava moved through the mall, she could feel the eyes of the staff and customers on her. The murmurs had started again, but this time they weren't filled with disbelief or judgment. There was a shift in the air. People were starting to see her as someone who wasn't afraid to stand up, to lead with authenticity and strength. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. She had done that long ago. Ava's thoughts were interrupted when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Nia approaching, her face a mix of determination and excitement. "Ava, the press is starting to take notice," Nia said, her voice low but urgent. "They're asking questions about the changes you announced today." Ava raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She had expected this. It was inevitable that the media would catch wind of her actions, of the way she had taken control of a situation that most people would have let slide. But Ava wasn't most people. "Let them ask," Ava replied calmly. "I'm not here for their approval. I'm here to make a real difference." Nia nodded, understanding exactly what Ava meant. "I'll start gathering everything for the press release. We'll control the narrative, make sure it's clear what you're doing here." Ava smiled slightly, appreciating Nia's commitment. "Good. Make sure they know we're not just talking about change. We're making it happen." As Nia walked away to handle the logistics, Ava took a moment to herself, standing in the middle of the mall, the heartbeat of her empire. The changes were already underway, and there was no turning back now. Ava wasn't the same person who had walked into this mall earlier that day. She was a woman with a purpose, a leader with a vision, and a force that couldn't be ignored. She was about to show the world exactly what happens when you give someone the power to shape their own destiny. And she wasn't going to stop until the world understood that Ava Carter wasn't just a name. They would remember it as a symbol of strength, resilience, and unwavering determination. The road ahead was still long, but it was hers to walk. And she would walk it with confidence, knowing that every step was another victory in the making. Ava stood at the edge of the balcony, looking out over the sprawling city below her. The lights flickered like stars, but her focus was far beyond the cityscape. She wasn't thinking about the view or the luxury of the penthouse she had earned. She was thinking about the journey ahead, the work, the commitment, and the deep change that was now underway. She had taken the first steps, and now there was no turning back. The fight for respect, for real change, had only just begun. As she turned away from the window, her phone buzzed on the table beside her. It was Nia again. "Ava, we've got some reactions from the press," she said, her voice filled with urgency. "They're focused on the changes you've announced, but they're also asking about the deeper issues. They want specifics." Ava smiled softly, knowing this moment was coming. The world was always watching, always waiting for someone to slip. But Ava had made it clear. She wasn't just talking about change. She was making it happen. "Let them ask," Ava replied. "We'll give them the specifics they need. I'm not afraid to show them what real leadership looks like." Nia hesitated for a moment, then responded, "All right, I'll prepare the detailed statement, but it's clear they want to know about the personal side of things. About you. They want to understand the woman behind the moves." Ava thought for a moment, her gaze drifting back to the city. The woman behind the moves. Was she that different from the person they saw in the press? Ava knew her story, the struggles, the setbacks, the countless hours spent building from nothing. But it wasn't about her. It was about everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. "Make it clear," Ava said with purpose, "that this isn't about me. This is about everyone who's ever been overlooked, underestimated, or cast aside. It's about making sure that no one has to fight this battle alone." She paused, her voice firm. "This is about creating a world where respect isn't a privilege for the few, but a right for all." Nia's voice softened. "Understood. I'll get that message across." Ava set her phone down and walked over to the table where the reports and documents she had gathered were neatly arranged. Her vision for the future was becoming clearer every day. And now it was time to show the world the blueprint. She had always known her worth, but today she was